Thank you, everyone. I'm here today to talk about how you, as an adjudicator, evaluate a team's rebuttal and its importance in a debate. Rebuttal is core to the very notion of debating. It's what makes it different than public speaking, and one of the core skills which broadly involve framing debates, characterizing actors in debates, the ability to construct arguments, and the ability to rebut arguments. What I'm going to do is look at 5 mistakes that adjudicators tend to make when they are trying to understand and evaluate rebuttal, and try and give you a way of making the way in which you evaluate rebuttal sharper. So the first, rebuttal means different things, and teams often overclaim what their rebuttal is doing. The mistake we make is that we don't think enough about different kinds of rebuttal and what they do in the context of a debate. The first place to start with this is making a clear distinction between what we think is contradicting rebuttal, i.e. pure rebuttal, and competing rebuttal, which isn't really rebuttal at all, but it's often what teams mean when they say I'm rebutting an argument. So what is pure rebuttal? In its simplest sense, what rebuttal is to show the argument made by another team is incorrect. That normally means attacking the premise of a team's claim, attacking the logic which gets them to an outcome, or challenging whether that outcome is good, bad, or important in the debate. So that's all a direct attack on an argument made by another team. A second kind of rebuttal, or semi-rebuttal, is competing rebuttal, which doesn't directly attack the argument a team makes, but will say, here's the outcome you care about, and here's a different pathway to get to that outcome which is exclusive to our side. May not be exclusive, it's not a particularly well-made argument, but that's the ideal. Let's make the comparison here. So take a very simple argument in a simple debate. Legalize recreational drugs. A team may argue, starting with the premises, that illegal markets tend to be unregulated by governments, that drug dealers and drug sellers have an incentive to profit maximize. Cocaine, heroin, any other drug is expensive, so it is rational that they watered down the product by including other additives in it. These can be things like rat poison, and therefore ingesting rat poison as well as cocaine is really bad for an individual's health. The outcome is that the health of drug addicts or drug users suffers greatly. Now, a pure form of rebuttal, contradicting rebuttal, could attack that on multiple different levels. You could, for instance, attack some of the logic by note that you can't simply water it down because you need to maintain quality in order to sell to the same customers. That's one of the reasons lots of drugs have labels on them. You don't want to harm your customers because you want them to come back again and again and again. Or you could attack the outcome. You could say that watering down lots of these drugs more often than not is beneficial rather than harmful. Those are all just examples of pure rebuttal, which is attacking directly the argument a team has made. The second form of rebuttal, competing rebuttal or semi-rebuttal, would instead say that both sides in this debate care about the health and well-being of potential drug users. But prices will be coming down if you have a legal market, potentially. Availability is going to be easier, and therefore people will take more drugs and their health will suffer more. What is the difference between these two kinds of responses? The first kind of response, if done well, takes down the argument made by a team, arguably could even flip it, we'll talk more about that anon, while that second kind of argument, that competing rebuttal, doesn't take down the argument a team has made, just gives you a consistent form of logic. Both the original argument and the rebuttal now may well be true together. The difference then is how you evaluate it. In the first case, it's, is this successful in taking down the argument? In the second case, what you have to do as a judge, ideally with help from the teams, depending on what they say, is say, well, this is one claim we've made, here's another claim, both could be true together, what one is more important, more plausible, or all the other mechanisms you use to compare competing arguments against each other. And I think it's important to realize that teams often mean competing rebuttal when they're saying they've rebutted something, but the original argument still stands and needs to be evaluated in that sense. So let's move on to that. The second mistake people make. Related to that is we don't often think enough about what rebuttal does. I've already talked about competing rebuttal as a different form of rebuttal, but even say you have a direct attack, there are several different things which that argument could potentially do, the rebuttal could do. All of them have different implications in the debate. The first one, the most powerful kind of rebuttal may be an attempt to flip the argument. In the simplest sense, this says that actually the outcome you want happens on our side rather than on your side because of some problems with your logic. So that is one form of a direct attack. That could also be useful when it comes to competing responses, but can also be done with direct responses. Just go, your logic doesn't lead you to that outcome, it leads you to the exact opposite outcome. This is rarely going to happen in debates, but teams will often claim it does. So note that just what a team claims their rebuttal does isn't necessarily what it does, but if it is able to flip the argument, it can be very effective because you are taking the claim of what is important from the other team and co-opting it to your side. That's one thing rebuttal can do. More likely, good direct rebuttal is an attempt to negate. It's an attempt to take away the persuasive value of a constructive, potentially rebutted argument another team has made entirely. In the ideal world, you're trying to make it have no validity at all. At the end of the debate, you don't believe that the argument made by, say, the proposition has any plausibility of occurring given the responses we have got. Now, that can be done in multiple different ways, as we talked about before. More likely than not, it will be partial negation, and you won't be entirely sure how successful it is. But the aim there is to say the argument has no plausibility at the end of the debate. A third form, and we see this an awful lot, is mitigation. This isn't actually taking down the argument, but it's diminishing its importance in the debate. That could be done by diminishing some of the potential links, so it doesn't seem that the outcome the team cares about occurs in as many cases, or it might just seem very marginal. It could be done by attacking the impact, to either say that this isn't a very large impact or it's a large impact in very small numbers of cases. The difference between negation and mitigation is pretty important here. If you negate the argument, ideally it doesn't stand at all. If you mitigate, it still stands to some degree. There's a spectrum. Maybe you mitigate by 10%, maybe you mitigate by 50%, but that matters a great deal to realize. You don't eliminate the argument from the debate, you just may diminish its importance. That can still be very valuable for a team to do, because it could mean that their constructive arguments or other arguments put them above the team making the original argument, but it doesn't eliminate the argument entirely. So you as a judge need to work out what that rebuttal is aiming to do and what it does. Teams will ideally tell you, but often teams will be lying. It isn't even what they claim their rebuttal does, and you need to be aware of that, and it's much easier if you're aware of the various things a piece of rebuttal can do. The third mistake, though, we see this a lot, is judges demand too little of rebuttal or potentially demand too much. What do I mean by that? Just having a response doesn't mean your response is effective. Teams will often name check a lot of the claims made by the other team without actually sufficiently responding to it. When it comes to evaluating rebuttal, you should be evaluating the same way you evaluate a constructive argument. Was it successful in proving what it needs to prove? Not simply was it there, but does it actually stand up? Now, it's slightly harder when it comes to rebuttal because it's not just in a vacuum. You need to prove that it stands up given the claims another team has made, but that's the same kind of evaluative process which is occurring. But at the same time, it's not the case you need to say as much as the other team when it comes to rebut an argument versus the constructive. You may, but just intuitively, given you can attack premises, you can attack the logic, you can attack the impact, there is immediately potentially less time you'll need to spend on the argument. So you don't necessarily need to spend 3 minutes to defeat a 3-minute argument. It may be done in 1 minute. And I think judges should be aware of that. You shouldn't just say they have a response. You still need to have a fairly large plausibility check as to whether it actually takes down the argument, while at the same time, you should be aware that rebuttal doesn't necessarily always need to be in as much detail, because you don't need to attack every part of a logic for you to still have an effective response to a claim which is made. The fourth mistake judges often make is that we undercredit the importance of rebuttal in a debate overall. One way I like to think about this is ask yourself what a team's trying to do in a debate. And in a BP debate, every team is trying to do the same thing. They're trying to prove that on balance, their side of the debate is correct, and their team does the most to show that. But just looking at a basic equation, on balance and showing that you're doing the most, a lot of that involves rebuttal. Very impressionistically, up to a third of that changes debate to debate, depends about what happens, but to show on balance, it's pretty effective to show that the other side's arguments are either untrue, unimportant, or ideally support your side themselves. Why does this matter? It matters for a couple of reasons. One reason why it then matters is because you can therefore win debates with rebuttal alone. Your constructive material could be important, but rebuttal could be the most important contribution you can make, and it does a great deal to show on balance your side of the debate is correct. So rebuttal itself can have persuasive independent value for any team in the debate, but I think often people just don't consider rebuttal to be a very powerful extension. It absolutely can be. And also when you think about rebuttal as one of the core elements of a debate, which can really add persuasive value to it, it doesn't really matter whether you call it rebuttal or you call it my third point of constructive. That's doing the same thing. It is attacking an argument another team has made and therefore showing that on balance your side may well be correct. So let's make it clear here that it's important to credit rebuttal as a key aspect of what all teams are trying to do in a debate. The fifth mistake, which is often made, is that judges often undercredit rebuttal when it's made late, or sometimes you overcredit rebuttal when it's made late. What do I mean by late here? It works in slightly different ways in different circumstances, but here's the common one. The Prime Minister makes a large number of arguments. The Leader of the Opposition doesn't respond in any detail to any of them. The DPM continues to further the Prime Minister's arguments, and all the responses come in the DLO. The vast majority of responses come in the DLO. People often call that backloading. Why is that potentially beneficial, and what are the potential ways in which you should adjudicate it? For a team, there could be lots of reasons why they would do it. One of them is that the PM and the DPM, the opening government team, cannot respond to those arguments. That may seem a little bit unfair in the same way that a PM and a DPM can't respond to the closing opposition. It is not in itself at all invalid for you to do that, but it does change the way you adjudicate the debate slightly. If a team has a chance to respond, maybe in a circumstance where you have a piece of competing analysis versus another piece of competing analysis, where you're not 100% sure which side is correct when you evaluate the two arguments, you probably don't need to give any special dispensation, even marginal dispensation, to the team to teams which are able to respond. I.e., You don't need to have a higher demand of a completeness of a response or completeness of an argument. If you have a DLO or an extension speaker having responses to a case where the other teams aren't able to respond, you can probably say you still need to credit in the way we credit extensions, but you need to have a larger degree of completeness. You need to be able to be taking down the arguments. It probably will not be as good if you just have a competing piece of rebuttal without showing why the other side is wrong, while at the same time it probably doesn't make a difference if you're still fully negating an argument. So if you're fully negating the argument another team makes, it doesn't matter if it's coming up the first speech on LO, it's coming up on the fourth speech of LO. The second part of that is often lots of teams will say when you're in closing government and the opposition extension never responded to it and it's too late. Unfortunately, it often isn't too late. You can still have responses in the government whip. Now, the difficulty here is how much of a response can you have in the opposition whip and new responses. I think the common sense rule is if what you're doing is pure rebuttal, attacking the premises, logic, or outcome of another team that can all fit within an opposition whip and a government whip as well. If what you're trying to do is have competing rebuttal, coming up with different reasons why you don't get the outcome, which aren't related to directly attacking another team, that probably isn't acceptable. But the key is that where an argument or response comes up in a debate does matter, but it absolutely does not mean that we can't give a response no credit at all. So at the end, I think the core lessons are that we have to understand there are different kinds of rebuttal, pure rebuttal and competing rebuttal, which do different things. We have to understand the purpose and the value of rebuttal changes from potentially flipping all the way to just minor mitigation. We have to understand what kind of rebuttal we're getting. We need to demand completeness from the arguments, from rebuttal in the way we would from a constructively made argument. That rebuttal still needs explanations, and simply having a response does not mean you have a response which defeats a case. We need to understand how important rebuttal is in a debate to make sure it gets sufficient credit. And we don't want to overstress rebuttal which comes too late or overvalue rebuttal which comes too late.